We're going. We're doing it. Genesis, it's all right. Let them talk. It's fine. We'll be okay. I'm glad to see you, boy. Here about 15 or 20 minutes till. Gwen's not here, and Ben is, I think, with the youth from the college over at the food bank. I think it's where he said he was going to be. I couldn't quite remember that. I was kind of expecting him to be here. But anyway, I'm glad you're here. Every last single one of you. Gary's not here. I was expecting him, so we just see. What? Anything? Talk. Okay. Prayer concerns for us right now. That's not me. Okay. That's okay. And it's not Judy, Jimmy Nell. It was Mike. We'll blame it on Mike. That's Mike's phone. Your reminder, huh? We do want to pray for Tasha and for her. I think it was a former sister-in-law that was in ICU, and I don't know the update on how she's doing, but she was really concerned about her. Mike, your cousin in Lubbock, any update in terms of how he's doing? Just the same?
I went and had MRI and X-rays on my back.
Okay. No results yet?
No.
Okay.
I'll see the doctor next week.
Because the pain is still there. You do have some pain still. Okay. If it's not the knees, it's the back, and if it weren't the back, it'd be your head.
Yeah.
So let's not get it that high, okay?
The head hurt anything.
That's right. Any news from Lubbock or anything?
Ricky is a real trooper facing the radiation every day.
Okay.
And then his sister fell and broke her elbow.
Oh, my goodness.
On top of everything else. So the mom is just...
She's taking care of the whole cattle company. Yeah, but still, you can't duck that. Okay, so Mike and cousins in Lubbock, Ricky as well as her sister that fell. So we want to be praying for her. Ben said that Beth continues to get stronger, and we are grateful for that. And as a result of that, she's still Beth. We did hear from my sister-in-law that my nephew Michael had the fourth round of 48 hours of chemo. It knocks him out. She says he sleeps about 16 to 19 hours the first 2 days after it, because it just puts him flat of his back. But his spirits seem to be good, and there's still some hope there. But that's no other update in terms of that. Just pray for Michael's storms. Wally's doing better and better, and just really grateful for that, and continues to move ahead, and things happen that are supposed to happen right now. So for Pat and Wally, we just thank God that he's doing something in their lives. Haven't heard from Val and or about her mom, but the last word we had was she was appropriately responding to the treatment she was entering into, and there really seems to be some stability in her life. So we're very grateful for that continues to be the case. Virginia Duffield and her situation, along with her sister that lives with her, Betty. The Kramers, we've been mentioning her. Vita Bracco, Judy's real estate friend that's dealing with cancer.
She's going into her
Third round of chemo. Tomorrow.
She's been having a lot of nausea.
Consequences, yeah.
A little anxious about tomorrow.
Yeah. So she has the third round tomorrow. She's been having some collateral consequences of the treatments that bother her, and so she's concerned. We do pray for her. Our neighbor, Sandra Pratt, is dealing with cancer, but seems to be, we see her out.
Yeah.
So, but she's still very weak, and so needs to be very mindful of that. Not heard an update on the Weaver family that we've been telling you, but y'all would not know Becky and David, but very active Christians, particularly in the Journey community for many of us, for the Sisks, dear friends of the Sisks. They, David Weaver and David Sisk, really are great companions, and the family is very precious to me. But their grandson that was involved in the ATV accident, and the last word was the cranial pressure was down to almost normal, but it was still spiking. But there seems to be evidence that whatever damage had happened, that there will be a permanent result. Even if he survives, there will be some collateral effect. And I don't know if that's muscular. I don't know if that may be some slowness of speech or whatever. I don't know what that is, but there's full expectation that as he survives, that there will be some result as of the head trauma that he has endured. So we pray for the Weaver family. For Judy's former brother-in-law, George, he has improved a little bit, but seems to respond to some questions with yes or no, and that is really a move forward, because the last word was that things seem to be really degenerating very, very strongly with him, and he is not. I turned my microphone on to help a little bit, so hopefully you can hear better that way. Hopefully God continues to touch his life and help recover, help him move into full embrace of life. But
take him off the feeding tube before they can graduate.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So he seems to be chewing on his own, or at least swallowing, and so it seems to be a good sign. But George Scroll up in New Jersey, and just pray for him and the family. We've been praying for Elaine Garcia's granddaughter Everly, and she had some surgery and to congenital things. She's only like 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old, so we're praying for that. Frances Quinn, a dear friend of Judy's and mine, has cancer, or thinks, we don't know. She did some biopsies, but maybe they removed 4 polyps, but they've done also a bleeding ulcer or bleeding tumor, and they took a biopsy of that, and the doctor's initial thing says that we think it may be cancerous, but it can be removed surgically. But we just pray for Frances Quinn. For Vicki and for Rick and for family and for y'all's extended family at the senior center, what's going on there for Pat's granddaughter and what is happening there for Sue's granddaughter and the child that is there for Kathy Copetis. There's just a lot on the list that we've been remembering, and so we just pray for that. So we'll do that. Yeah, Vicki sees the doctor tomorrow and sees what's going on. She doesn't have a lot of breath, but no COPD as of right now, no diagnosis that way. So we give God thanks for that, Vicki. Just pray that you will do that. Good. Yeah. That's not good. Going to have to. Rick's got hearing aids, so that's so much of pretending he doesn't hear. I got it stopped up here, and I'm not hearing two people too well that way. So, are you hearing me a little bit better? I've got the speakers on almost. Okay. I know, doing one of these numbers, so you just go right ahead. Your ear's going to fall asleep, though, Joanne. So if I get Judy to go over there, and the extreme white button on the extreme right, if you will gently push it up, Judy, that's the master volume. Don't push it up a whole lot because it is very sensitive, but the one on the far, far side, yeah, way over there, just push it up a little bit. I continue to talk and talk and talk and talk. Okay, that's good. That's good, darling. That way I won't get some feedback. That's a little bit better? Okay, good. Okay, pray that Linda and Leonard are doing okay. I know that Kairos is coming up. We want to pray for Kairos and for that experience. We have a women's journey coming up at the end of this month while Kairos is going on. And then we have our women's walk to Emmaus, and we have Val and Rochelle that are pilgrims on that walk so far. So just looking to see if there are those who've not experienced that, it would be just a wonderful opportunity. So we'll be praying for both of those experiences. So let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we will share our Bible study, because Judy's got limited amount of power in that thing. So you may get out a little early if that thing starts shutting down on us. So we'll just see where it goes. That won't control. I'm going to do the Bible study anyway. God, thank you so much for people that mean a lot to us beyond our own families and our own circumstances. Thank you that in our relationship with Christ and the ways that he transforms us, that we are given bigger hearts and larger arms and more caring and empathetic hearts to reach out and to care for those that we love very personally and those that we are acquainted with because our family shares those needs with us. God, be present to each of these circumstances, rejoicing for those things that you have given us that is of healing nature, but also, God, your presence with them as they struggle to find where life is for them in the midst of a dark possibility. God, we lift all of these lives to you, trusting that you are already at work in their behalf, equipping us then to join you in the task of caring and nurturing and loving them. God, we offer these prayers to you in the name of Christ, the great physician. Amen. Okay, now we are in the book of Genesis. And we are now at chapter 39 and just racing on ahead. Of course, Bill will show up 6 months later and we're still in Genesis, but, it seems like a race to me. We're picking up the Joseph story again. Remember, chapter 38 is a hiatus. It's an insertion of a separate story about the older brother Judah and his abandoning his brothers and going off and establishing the territory that ultimately is the home place of David. And David is a heir of the tribe of Judah. And the rest of the brothers, you remember, sold Joseph at the end of chapter 37, sells Joseph into slavery to get rid of this brother of theirs that they can't stand. And Judah was going to rescue him. And, of course, when he gets back to camp, he finds out he's been sold off and headed for Egypt. And Judah's just beside himself, doesn't know what to do. And so that may have been the trigger why Judah just simply said, I'm tired of dealing with you guys. I'm going to set off on my own. And so he turns aside from them and begins to settle in the southernmost part of the land of Palestine around Bethlehem and that environment where the other brothers were on further north of Jerusalem all the way up to first century Samaria and that area north of Jerusalem where the other tribes will hang out into the monarchy later on. At the end of chapter 37, you'll remember, this is at chapter 37, verse 28. You remember that they've gone off and Joseph has been sent by his dad out to check on his brothers to see that they're behaving themselves. And of course, they see him coming and decide that Daddy's not around. We're gonna get rid of this irritant and we're gonna kill him. And so both Reuben and Reuben and Judah, the oldest two brothers of the two of the Leah clan, decide that they are going to protect Joseph somehow, and so they've chunked Joseph into a cistern that's dry, and they're up top having some ribs and barbecue and having a picnic, and along comes some traders. And in verse 28 of chapter 37, the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew up Joseph. The Midianites drew up Joseph and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And the Ishmaelites took Joseph to Egypt. Now, we skip forward to chapter 39. Well, actually, down just at the end of that chapter, after they talk about Reuben and Judah coming back and not finding him there and wondering where they were, and they're planning to take his long sleeve coat and bloody it with a lamb's blood and everything else. And this is before the days of DNA and other modern science. And so they took it back and showed it to Joseph's dad, and who just grieves himself to death knowing that a wild animal has caught Joseph and devoured him. And then at the very end of chapter 37, it says, meanwhile, the Midianites, not the Ishmaelites, the Midianites supposedly sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. Now at the end of the chapter, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. And now we skip to chapter 39, the Judah saga and his marriage marrying off his oldest son to Tamar, and the oldest son dies, heir, and God doesn't like him, so he kills him off, and then the next son comes along, and That's Onan, and he doesn't want any competition with his heirs, and so he refuses to impregnate Tamar, and so God doesn't like his behavior, and so he kills him off, and now Jacob's got one boy left, and a boy by the name of Shelah. And Sheila's still a young lad, and so he tells Tamar, you go back to your parents and keep your widow's grieving garments on, because that forbade her any kind of promiscuity or any kind of being able to marry off someone else. There was still the possibility that, of course, Jacob's lying to her, but you go and wait for Shamar or Shelah to get a little bit more tooth and jowl, a little bit older, to be able to afford you. You're a high maintenance girl, and so when he's old enough, then we'll talk about whether or not he's going to fulfill the assignment of levirate marriage to bring his older brother a son in his name. But of course, as we found out, Tamar finally figured out that Joseph was selling her a bill of goods, had no intention, because Jacob believed that the real problem of why his boys had been killed off by God was because she was an evil presence. And so Jacob doesn't intend to give her to Shelah at all. And she finally figures that out, and so she throws off her widow's clothes and puts a veil on her face and dresses up like some floozy and heads out to a path that lays between Judah's home base and where they're shearing the sheep, and she plays the part of the harlot, and sure enough, Judah is smitten with her and promises to pay her a kid goat, which is pretty good payment for her services. And of course, he didn't have it with him. He wasn't planning on having an escapade, and so she bargains for something that will be sort of earnest money for him. And so she takes the little signet, the little cylinder clay-wrapped form around his neck that is tied there with probably a leather belt of some sort that would be rolled into clay tablets that were documents of legal import, to signify that that's who is signing this contract. This is Judah. It's got his name on it, and so nobody else has that kind of little cylinder. And so she feels that. Plus, she wants his walking stick, which was hand carved, that was peculiar to Judah, his own special designed, from some French boutique or whatever. So he's got his own really unique staff and he gives that to her. So after they've had their cavorting, well, he goes back to the sheep and grabs one of the lambs and hands it to his best buddy, the man whose daughter or whose wife was given to Judah, and of course she's dead now, and so Judah has got his brother-in-law there, and they're getting, or maybe it was his father-in-law, but whoever, he gives that dear friend that he's been doing this to, you take this lamb and you go find her. And he goes back and she's nowhere to be found. And he asks around and says, where's that prostitute that temple prophetess? It's a different word that they talk about to him. And of course the townspeople say, we don't have anybody like that around here. There never has been anybody like that. So, his good friend, what's his name? Hira goes back and says to Judah, I couldn't find her. He said, well, I took care of my end of the bargain, let well enough alone, until news reaches him that Tamar is pregnant. And he knows it's not Shelah. And so the right that his daughter-in-law, even though they're not formally married, she still is his property, says, you bring her out and we're going to kill her. We're going to burn her at the stake. And on her way out to be burned, she pulls out the staff and that unique signet cylinder that was worn around the neck of Judah, and says, whoever it was that impregnated me owes this and this. And to Judah's credit says, okay, I'm it. She caught me. And so he takes her back into his home. There's no indication that Sheila married her, but there is an implication that he is now her former daughter-in-law, and that would only be the case if Sheila actually married her. The Bible just doesn't say that. It's one of those questions that's sort of left open. And so she has twins, and just like Jacob and Esau, and but the older one this time, the first one out, did receive the lion's share of God's blessings, as was intended that way. And so that's the Judah story. And now, where's Joseph? Chapter 39, verse 1. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites, not the Midianites, from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. And family, we've talked a lot about the Yankee story and the Southern story, the Confederate story. When the scribes in Babylon captivity, some 1,500 years after these events, began to hear and take those oral stories that they'd heard all their lives from the different clans and different sections of Palestine, they're in captivity in Babylon. And so they began to write down those stories. And the editors, when they receive these stories, they don't try to erase the problems between them. They sometimes kind of weave them together, and if you don't watch real carefully, the Yankee story and the Southern story get mingled together, and all of a sudden you say, whoa, what's happened here? Why do we have clean and unclean animals in Noah's Ark, and in another part of the story they're going in 2 by 2 and not by 7s, and so so when you look at it and dissect it, you realize, okay, the Southern story told it this way, the Northern story told it this way, and so the editor put them together, but there's some very vivid scenes that occur. And one of the signals that you're dealing with the Southern story, the more primitive and earlier story, is that God is always called by that name that was given to Moses some 800 years, or not 800 years, because Moses is going to be at the tail end of the Egyptian captivity. So probably maybe 250, 300 years later, Moses is going to meet God at the burning bush, and God's going to tell him his name. Well, in the storytelling of the Southern tradition, anytime they tell a story, including the second creation story in Genesis chapter 2, 4b and following, it's always Yahweh that's talked about. Whereas the Northern tradition doesn't ever refer to God as Yahweh by his name. He just simply calls him God. And so anytime you see that in the English, the capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, you know you're dealing with the Southern tradition, the more primitive tradition. It's easier reading, it's more dynamic and adventurous and more straightforward, anthropomorphic, and whereas the Northern tradition is a little bit more sophisticated, and instead of God coming and dressing him up as a messenger or a visitor to Abraham's tent, in the Northern tradition, God speaks to his audience through dreams and through visions. In the Southern tradition, God doesn't mess with dreams or vision. He just comes and knocks on the door and says, I want you to pay attention to me. And he speaks directly. Of course, the audience doesn't realize I was just talking to the living God until he's gone. He says, whoa, I was in the prayer. It's like Jacob wrestling with God. He didn't realize until the next morning. He says, I was wrestling with God. This is Bethel, the house or the gate of heaven or the gate of God. So in chapter 39, this is the Southern tradition story. And so God is always going to be referred to by those capital letters L-O-R-D. And so it's now the Ishmaelites, not the Midianites, who sell him into Potiphar. And the Lord, again, notice it's Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of the master Egyptian. There is now introduced a very special phrase, the Lord was with him. In 1 Samuel, the story of David, the Lord was with him. In the prophet Isaiah, in the heat of battle, when Jerusalem is fixing to fall, the king wants to surrender the city, and Isaiah goes to the king and says, don't you dare surrender the city. God's going to rescue us. Well, how can I know? Give me some sort of fleece. He says, there's going to be a young woman that's going to bear a child tonight, and she's going to call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. Actually, Emmanuel is with us, God. The L at the end of Emmanuel, L is Elohim. That's God. So God with us is with us, God. That's what she named that child. Jesus in Matthew's gospel, both at the beginning of the gospel and the end of the gospel, Jesus says, "I will be with you always. I will be with you. I will be Emmanuel." And in the first chapter of Matthew's gospel, Joseph asked what name we're going to call this boy. And you're going to call his name Jesus, for he will be with his people. He is Emmanuel. He is God with us. So beginning with this particular story, there are two kind of hints. One of them is that in Jewish parlance, when you said that God is with them, it was a kind of rationalization that they led on to say why some people became millionaires and other people continued to be janitors. The difference between the two was they figured that that was God's assignment, that God was with that person and blessed them in a special way, and that he wasn't with someone else. Or if somebody had a remarkable talent like David had, it was God who gave him that talent. It is God with him that made that real. And ultimately, this little hint, this story of God with him, God with us, whatever, becomes incarnate and distilled in that promise that there will be a Messiah, an anointed one, the one who will be with us, representing God's purposes. And that becomes the theme that is even realized in the New Testament. And so the Lord was with Joseph. Joseph had a Midas touch. He was in the household, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Not that Joseph was anything special, but that Joseph gave evidence that he was really, man, he had talent. And it wasn't because he was so smarter. He probably had freckles and a few other things that made him look like he was a dunce. I'm teasing. Very dark skin, but it doesn't matter. But even Potiphar realized there is a power with Joseph that's not native to Joseph. The Lord is with him. And the Lord caused all that Joseph did to prosper in his hands. He had the Midas touch. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him and made him overseer of the house and put him in charge of everything that he had. Potiphar was impressed. And Joseph earned his way up the ladder of respect until he is the king dog over this fiefdom, over this large house of royalty and everything else. He is his right-hand man. He is his chief of staff, whatever you want to call him. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had, in house and in field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and having him, he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Now, why would he be so concerned about that? That could represent two things. The most obvious one is that this guy basically didn't have a care in the world, except when he wanted a Whataburger, he wanted a Whataburger. Or if he wanted lobster, he was concerned about that. That's where his mind was. That's all he really cared about. What am I going to eat for breakfast? What am I going to eat for lunch? Anybody married to anybody like that? We won't ask Jimmy Nell. But there is always that person who says, "No, I don't want that. I want to do this or something." It could have done that. But look with me over to chapter 43 at verse 32 of Genesis. Genesis chapter 43 at verse 42. This is part of the story that we'll get to in about 6 years, where the brothers have now come back, and Joseph reveals himself as being their brother they thought they had killed off in slavery in Egypt. And in verse 32 of chapter 43, I'm going to begin at verse 30. Then Joseph made haste, for his heart yearned for his brother, and he sought a place to weep, and he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself said, "Let food be served." And they served him by himself, and them by themselves. In other words, the brothers ate over at one end of the room, and Joseph ate at the other end of the room, because by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread. It was forbidden for them to eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians and to their religion. So it could be nothing more than this Potiphar is really concerned about the fact that his food is prepared in a separate kitchen, and that it doesn't touch Joseph's hand, and Joseph has no responsibility for that. That is specially prepared sacred meals that was from his God, and he was obedient to his religious tradition. That may be, and that's my preferred understanding about the fact that Joseph had control of the whole house except the kitchen. And that Potiphar maintained as a distinct ownership, that his food was separate from that which everybody else ate, particularly this Jewish boy, Joseph. They never ate together. Joseph never ate from Potiphar's table. His table was prepared distinct. And you all know that in the Jewish law, that ultimately becomes part of the Jewish tradition also, that Jews did not eat with Gentiles. That's what angered them so much about Jesus. He just forgot who he was eating with, and he didn't care if it was a sinner or somebody whose hand wasn't clean, or there happened to be a woman at the table. It didn't matter to Jesus. If you were hungry and he was hungry, he was going to eat with you. It was one of the most scandalous and the most abusive behaviors of Jesus that really awakened in the Jewish leadership of the first century their ire and their desire to get rid of him. Because if Jesus' movement began to break down Jewish law and say, hey, it's okay to mess with people like that. It's okay to eat with those sinners. They didn't have a ground to stand on, and it really was offensive to them. And so this may be sort of the seedbed, again, of Jewish law and their understanding about how their dietary needs will meet. So now Joseph was handsome and good looking. And if you look back over to chapter 29, verse 17, and you could read the Hebrew, the description of Joseph is exactly the same description of his mama, Rachel. Now, in 29:17, it's more like feminine words. She was beautiful and comely. Here it's a man, so he was handsome and good looking. Same Jewish words, same Hebrew words. He took after his mama. And yeah, well built, of course. Gotta be well built, right? Just like Rachel, she was a tank to deal with. Now she was very attractive, evidently according to Jacob. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. And the translation here is a translation of the Hebrew expression, she lifted up her eyes, which is even to this day in the Near East. If you'll notice, oftentimes when you're dealing with the Iraqi or the leadership of not only Iraq but Iran, they'll be wearing dark glasses, and it's not because they have a bright sunlight. It's partially because of that. But in the Near East, eyes are such revealing tales of the soul of the person. They are experts at reading someone's eyes and knowing if you're lying or if you're ready to negotiate. And so they always wear glasses on their eyes. Or in antiquity, because they didn't have sunglasses yet, they would not look at you. They would look down so that you couldn't see what their eyes were telling you. And so to lift up your eyes is to of a desire to be seen and to be revealed and to make yourself known. It is a very powerful expression of intimacy, of desire, of a communication skill that we've basically lost. Even though in criminology, the movement of the eyes, called neuro-linguistic programming, is something that is studied because you can watch a person's eyes, and if they're telling a story, if they're accessing information, their eyes will go one way. If they're creating information, their eyes will go another way. And so detectives are sort of trained to watch that as a clue. And if they're left-handed, they do the reverse, and so you can't always count on that, but you can get some sort of hint that that's what's happening. But she lifted up her eyes on Joseph. She began to watch him. She was beginning to be alluring and attracted to him in no uncertain terms, and she proposed to Joseph, "Come on, let's go to bed together." But he refused and said to his master's wife, he gave her a little moral speech. He says, "Look here. having me, my master, has no concern about anything in his house. He said to Potiphar's wife, you know, I have access to everything that your husband owns. He has given me license to do with and to be responsible for everything except one thing in this house, and that's you and his meals. But I can't touch you. He has put everything in my house in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you're his wife. So how in the world can I do this great wickedness against my master and also a sin against God? And it wasn't just Jewish law that taught that a wife was exclusive property of her husband. It was Egyptian law. It was Phoenician law. Women, dear precious sisters of mine, women in antiquity and even still in most countries were owned by their spouses or their parents. They had no rights. Watching, and I don't know if you've been watching the pulling off of the hijabs off of the girls over in Iraq and Iran, and just flaunting the fact we're tired of being under this rule. We're just as equal as you are, and it's a dangerous thing. They're going to pay dearly for it, but it's the beginning break of a kind of patriarchal authority that simply says, God did not make you worthy of my respect or anybody else's. You, as a woman, belong to your man. Now, your husband can have sex with anybody. It's double standard. You, as their wife, you belong to him. And if you have intimacy with any other man, you're going to be killed. Not the man. I mean, it takes two to dance. Well, unless you're one-legged, I guess. But, you don't get to do, women, you don't get to do this. So here's Potiphar's wife just begging for Joseph to come and sleep with her. She's mesmerized by him. My suspicion is that Joseph not only was a man of high ethics, but he probably wasn't terribly attracted to her. I don't know that, but that would be something that could be a reason for his resolve. Just didn't find her that attractive. I don't know, but give him an excuse rather than just be a moral person that way. Whatever it was, he refused and kept going back. And then, verse 10, and although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he wouldn't listen to her, to sleep with her, or even to be with her, because this implies, okay, if you're not going to have sex, let's at least go have coffee together. There's a grooming kind of behavior that she wants to enter into. Let's just hang out together. Let's just be, And Joseph just refused that. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and when you would go into the house, you took off your outer garment, your heavy cloak that was sleeping bag, as well as weather-resistant bag or protection against the sun or against the elements. You never wore that inner garment or that outer garment inside the house. And so basically he's got his underclothes on, which I don't know how else to call it. It was the garment against his skin. It wasn't underwear. It wasn't seen to be provocative or anything that was inappropriate. It's just the way you dressed, and oftentimes it was tied around your waist and sometimes pulled up between your loins and wrapped around so that you could move comfortably, but it was cool and you were at peace in that home. It was like putting on bedroom slippers or something. And so he went into her, and she found out and realized that none of the men of the house were there in the house, just she and him. And she caught him by his garment and tried to force him to sleep with her. She grabbed hold. And the suggestion is all she could grab hold of was that coat, because the moment she saw him coming after her, after the moment she saw her coming after him, he started to run, and she grabbed that garment and just yanked it off of him, and he ran out of there stark naked. And he fled and got out of the house. Now, He didn't run into the streets more than likely. This house would have indicated a courtyard and other labyrinth of other kinds of rooms and places for him to run to, maybe to the cloakroom that had his outer garment. Wherever it was, he got out of her presence as fast as he could. And he escaped with his life, he thinks. But as we're going to find out next week, it didn't work out too well for him, because a woman scorned can be sometimes a woman that has incredible capacity to bring vengeance and to bring to get her pound of flesh out of him. But he's run for his life, and he's running out of that room naked, and boy, she's got a hold of his garment, and he doesn't have it around him anymore. The sort of the motif that I wanted to give to you out of this, as we look at the Joseph story, we think about the fact that she kept coming on to him and kept coming on to him, and that he had the capacity and the courage. I mean, there was no reason for Joseph not to succumb to her. My goodness, where's God? I've been sold into slavery. God's not down here. I'm a nobody. My people have abandoned me. I don't have anything to lose. You know, why not? I mean, there was nothing external about Joseph's circumstances that would have empowered him to stick by his guns, to stick by his morality, to stick by his resolve. And one of the things that we can learn from Joseph in a very practical way is that a good place to start committing yourself to an ethical life, to a good and powerful life, is to be honest with yourself about those places in your own life that are places of vulnerability, places of failings that could be soft spots, could be places that you are most vulnerable. As a pastor, for example, I remember in seminary and several training sessions that I had after I got out of the seminary and began pastoring, a warning about, if you do counseling, boy, be careful to make sure that somebody knows where you're there. Make sure that you do not put yourself in any kind of thing. And candidly, family, I have had, over the years, I've had a couple of situations where I found myself with counselees who were very inappropriate in their requests of me. And one of the things that saved me is that, number one, I knew that more than likely would happen. That when someone pays attention to you and listens to you, you just think they hung the moon, and it becomes really an attraction. And of course, if they get to know you, they find out that you're nothing but a jerk. But
And they weren't that attractive, and you weren't attracted to them anyway.
No, it's not totally true, darling. But that's okay. Thank you for your resolve. But it's not. I mean, it really was one of those situations. And I remember one in particular. I just simply said, I like what I do, and if I do that, yours and my relationship is going to be totally transformed. And I'm going to miss out on doing what I love to do. I love watching God help people become their best selves. And so I cannot risk that. I'm not willing to do that. The sessions lasted one or two more times, and then she left, because I don't know if she was embarrassed. I tried not to embarrass her, because what she was feeling and what she was wanting was kind of expected by me, but it was not something that I could risk. And so it what Joseph is going through, he made up his mind. I know where I can be gotten. I know what my weakness spots are. And so what you do is you practice keeping your eyes off of those moments, is a paraphrase of what Joseph did. You just don't put yourself, and you don't dwell in those circumstances that could create a volatile and inappropriate, unhealthy situation, a sinful situation. You're careful not to put yourself there. And so far, God has blessed me, and now I'm so old, I've survived, and so I don't really have to worry about it anymore too much. And so, but again, there's some precarious moments, and I was so glad that, like Joseph, I had been trained, and I had been told, and I had been taught that that you are vulnerable, and you are a person of incredible prospect and promise and delight to women particularly that you may find yourself counseling, be aware that it's not you. It is the fact that they've had someone listen to them, that you're not any better than anybody. A green pasture, the green grass looks a lot better on the other side of the fence anyway. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you're the man for every woman. That's just, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so it really began to help me really resolve that if I was going to be guilty of anything, it wasn't going to happen in a counseling situation. That was too much. Plus the fact it is very abusive, because in a counseling situation, even though I don't claim authority and power, I have incredible power, and a position of authority in that situation, and to abuse that is criminal, is ungodly, and is something that I talked myself through it. I understood that, and I did the research, and it really helped protect me. And so when you are going to be in a situation and you're a little afraid of where you might be vulnerable, you be honest about that. You even may pray about it, and find a way of simply saying, God, I need you to get me through this. I need you to be with me. And Joseph was, and I'm going to tell you, I never paid the price that Joseph did, but the price that you're going to see that he pays next week is pretty severe, and going to seem unfair. But we're all going to see that Joseph didn't change his stripes. He behaves the same way when he's facing the punishment that comes to him because of Potiphar's wife's lying about him. So we will get into that next week. So we will see what happens there as we continue the story for the 25th year. And eventually we will work our way through it, and we'll see what happens there on the other side. So we will stop there and pick up the story next week.
Well, you don't have to be that confessional again in the future.
I won't be that confessional again in the future. Yeah, I won't do that. There was something else I was going to... Oh, yeah, that's... No.
I don't know what you're going to say.
Yeah, it really is appropriate here, because it even happened this past Monday playing a golf tournament up there with some guys. But one of my church members, I was playing a tournament with him over at Corpus Christi Country Club, and the 18th tee box is right next to an apartment complex that's got a swimming pool. And this was the heat of summer, and so there were some very attractive bikini-clad girls out sunbathing along the pool. And so we're driving along, and he's driving the cart, and he and I both look and enjoy God's beauty. And I don't remember exactly what he said to me, but he says, "Preacher, you're not supposed to look." And I said to him, "Are you kidding me? I can look, I just don't touch." And he about fell out of the golf cart, because what I was telling him is, this is God's beauty. God gave us our sexuality. God gives us our ability to appreciate. But as Jesus warned us, we do not use our eyes to play games and to make that person an object of enjoyment or an object of self-gratification. We don't do that as a Christian. Doesn't mean I've always succeeded, but it does mean that, that there is a place where God's great gifts can become abusive and can become abused. And that's always a good place to remember that that's where Joseph functioned very well, and where he can teach us to be anticipating that our weakness and our place of vulnerability may be a place where, if we're not prepared, we will let our guard down, and we will pay dearly for it in ways that hurts us and hurts other people. And so we must be careful about that. Okay. There wasn't too much confession, was it, Judy? Okay, that was pretty straightforward. Pretty much confessional, though, so we can do that. All right, let me dismiss you into God's care and to a safe walk from here, and a chance to be with you Sunday. Oh, God, bless my family in special ways. Walk with them from this moment, empowering them to be honest and to be true to you and to each other and to themselves. God, grant to us the power of a Joseph who can be vested with incredible authority, incredible responsibility, can be trusted there because we do not abandon our integrity. We do not abandon our values and our principles. We indeed hold them up, and we continue to maintain our responsibility to honor you with every decision we make, with every decision that we are meeting So God bless this family, these brothers and sisters of mine. Walk with them and protect them, for I give them into your keeping in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. And if you haven't signed up for baptismal supper the 5th week from Sunday, I think it's over there. I didn't see it, but chips or we're going to at 5 o'clock on Sunday the 16th out at David and Veronica's, and you're invited to come. You don't have to. So